We are on air live with our first Drupal chat. I'm planning for this to be a regular weekly thing on Monday afternoons. I am Mark Isaacson. You can find me on Drupal.org at Vegan Triathlete. I also happen to be an instructor on Udemy, and I'm in the process of creating a number of different courses. So if you're curious about checking out my courses, I'll put a link in here for you. You can get a discount on any of the courses. I've got courses including Drupal courses. And then finally, for people who would like to catch the replay, where I'll put I'll put session notes and I'll put links to other relevant resources that we'll mention today, you will be able to find all of that loaded up at the link that I'm pasting into the chat window right now. Like I said, I'm really happy to see so many people joining here. There are 4 total seats in Blab for those of you who are new to Blab. So I will unlock this in a moment. We'll end up having 3 open seats. We'll have to try to play nicely with each other. And even in just the research that I had done for today, I've got just a ton of material, way more than we'd want to cover in one Blab. And now with having the other people here as well, I imagine there's going to be conversation that we're going to have. So we'll just see how the time goes. We'll try to sort things out to decide what I also want to talk about, and just try to make this a good experience for everybody. I do have a bit of an outline that we can follow to keep things rolling along. But at this moment, I'd like to open the seat up to give people a chance to talk. I would like people to give a chance for, let me make sure I take a look at his name again here. I may pronounce it wrong anyway, but Tobias Steckler, maybe how he pronounces it. He's the maintainer of the libraries API, and that's one of the things that we're going to talk about today. So please, when I open up the seat, give Tobias a chance to grab a seat, grab a seat as well. I came close enough with that, huh? Thanks, Tobias. All right, so I've unlocked a seat here. Tobias, you can come on in if you want to grab a seat so that we know that you've got a chance to talk. And we can leave other seats open as well. Oh, by the way, I guess I hadn't put any information in the links that I posted here. Blab works best when you use Chrome. So Tobias, if you're not on Chrome right now, you may need to hop on out and reboot yourself and come back in on Chrome. And so meanwhile, while Tobias is seeing if he's going to be able to grab a seat here, I will launch into the rest of the conversation. All right, Tobias, we'll see you back on Chrome in a little bit here. What we'll do here today is I've got a general agenda that we can go over. The overall point of what I'm looking to talk about today is having a look at whether it's time for you to begin using Drupal 8 or not. If you have any questions or any of your own thoughts that you'd like to share, you can feel free to post your questions or your thoughts in the chat stream there. And if you had a question that you wanted to ask, you could precede it with this /Q, and I'll know that you've got a question that you want to ask. So we'll see if Tobias is able to. All right. So setting things up here, what we're looking at is having a think about whether Drupal 8 is ready for us to use it or whether it's not ready for us to use it. And I'll tell you, before I started doing the research for this show, I held the opinion that, well, the contrib base just hasn't caught up, and there would be the 2 edge cases in which it would be suitable to can't wait for placeholders and breakpoints. Okay, there would be 2 edge cases that would be suitable for using the Drupal 8. One would be the site that was so extremely simple that you'd be able to build it off core alone, and the other that would be suitable would be the enterprise level site where they had the budget that they could actually pay developers to be porting modules. But as I did the research for the show to see what the most used contributed modules were, what state they were in, and whether they were usable or not, I actually was pleasantly surprised. So that's kind of a bit of a spoiler here, like jumping ahead to the end, that I'm finding that actually there's a lot more that is ready to go on Drupal 8. So I want to just make a couple points about this whole process of deciding whether you're going to use Drupal 8 or not. So today, when I was doing a little bit more research to get ready for this Blabcast, lo and behold, there were a couple of modules that had updates that were available today. So you're still going to be running into the situation that you've got modules, whether they're in dev or whether they're in an alpha or a beta, you're going to find that there's probably a lot that's changing, and you're going to be having to run like Drush up or however you want to do your updates. Another thing that I'm seeing is that I do actually use Drush, and what's happening to me right now when I'm using Drush is I'm getting this thing about invalid placeholders, and I just haven't dug into it yet to find out if it's Drush that's got the problem or if it's one of the contributed modules that hasn't switched out from using that exclamation point placeholder to the @ sign placeholder. So you're going to see those types of things as well with this being relatively new. Finally, when I go to the page to status report page, I'm getting the message about that I haven't set up my settings PHP or taken any actions to do the protection against the HTTP host header attacks. And so that for me is something I just haven't dug into yet, because I haven't started building sites with Drupal 8. And so I really haven't decided how do I want to go about dealing with that, particularly considering that I do actually use multi-site. And so I'm not sure what I would want to be putting in there. So you're going to be seeing those types of things as you get used to using Drupal 8. And so speaking of those types of things, some of the things that are new in Drupal 8 is that with your modules, you aren't able to disable them now. You either uninstall them or you don't uninstall them. Whereas previously you could actually disable them, go do a little bit of testing, and then you can re-enable them. Now with Drupal 8, when you uninstall the module, you lose all those configuration settings. You lose all that data. So that's neither here nor there. That's just the way that Drupal 8 is right now. And then another thing that I've noticed when I was doing my research for this is that some of the contrib modules don't have a README file or they don't have help text. And so figuring out the new way that they work can be a bit of a challenge poking around. So before I invite Tobias to start talking with us, I'll do one more quick run through here. So what I had done is I looked at Drupal.org. I took a look at what the most contributed modules were and what the most used contributed modules were and what the most used contributed themes were. And then I just did a quick run through to see whether they had a release, whether they didn't have a dev release, or whether they had something that was alpha plus. And so modules that I saw that didn't even have any release yet were web form, which now somebody has stepped up as a lead maintainer, and there are commits being made against that. Web form, I think, is probably a module that people do tend to use, still would like to use on the sites. The WYSIWYG module also had no release. There weren't any comments on the project page. There's no 8x branch on Drupal and cgit.drupal.org. Although Drupal 8 comes installed with CK editor right now. There's no release for backup migrate, but they said it's a ground up rewrite that's in progress, and there are commits that are being made. The media module is in a really complicated state right now. There's some stuff that's there's some stuff that's not, and regardless, it's going to be really different from the way things that were done in D7. Transliteration doesn't have a release. I don't know that that's something that's a critical module on too many people's sites. Views bulk operations doesn't have a release, and there's no comments on the project page, and there's no 8x branch. So I don't know what's going on with views bulk operations. That's something that I think some people may be a bit concerned about, depending on their needs on a project. The menu block module doesn't have any comments on the project page, and there's no 8x branch. Global redirect right now, they're trying to focus that just on the redirect module. And there is some work on GitHub, and there are some people that are reporting using it on production sites. So even though there's no release yet available on Drupal.org, it seems like they're pretty close with that. The context module, there are some commits that are being made. The IMCE WYSIWYG does not have a release, and again, I don't know that's something that's necessarily going to be critical for anybody on a site. The menu attributes module does have commits being made right now, so I'm not sure how long it's going to be till you could use that. The block class module has something that it seems like is actually ready for a stable release. They've got it in RTBC, and I think they're just waiting to get it merged into the project. Lightbox 2 actually says that it won't be ported. They're suggesting that you use color box instead. Media YouTube doesn't have any comments or any 8x branch, but I guess until media settles down, it would be kind of rough for media YouTube to be able to do anything. Flex Slider has some commits that are being made on Drupal.org right now. Better Exposed Filters does have commits that are being made. Special Menu Items doesn't have any comments on the project page or commits being made, so that's in an unknown status. Quick tabs, it's also unclear what's going on. It's hard to tell, like even when you look at GitHub, it's not definitive where that falls out right now. And then finally, the node clone module does have some commits being made. So all of those modules that I just ran through really quickly are modules that did show up as some of the most installed contributed modules, but they don't even have a release yet on Drupal. So when you're deciding if you want to use Drupal, you would need to look through some of those types of things. So let's just pick an example out, because I know I named probably like 10 or 12 modules that don't even have a release yet. So let's say that you were somebody who was a big web form user, and now you think you want to go to Drupal 8, and then you have a look at that and you say, oh my gosh, web form isn't even close yet. So and now maybe with the way that you can do some things with the forms on Drupal 8, you might decide you don't need web form anymore. Particularly like with contact forms, you can do a lot of new stuff with contact forms, and I think that was a big place where people used web form before. But these are some of the types of things that you would need to look at and find whether any of these modules are these critical pieces for you on the site that you want to build, and the lacking it would prevent you from being able to move ahead in building your site. So now moving to the next category of modules, there are modules that are in a dev release. And I'm going to give Tobias a chance to start talking, because one of those modules that is in a dev release now is the libraries API. I did do a bit of investigation though, and it seems like a lot of modules now are using their YAML files to reference the external libraries and doing it through the interface that Drupal core provides. So I'd like to get a chance to start talking to Tobias about this now and get your input about what are your thoughts for with the libraries API and its status in Drupal 8, and what you think about in terms of people. What advantages would the libraries API provide in Drupal 8, and what are your feelings about like how Drupal core is handling things now in the YAML files? So go ahead and have at it, Tobias. Let's hear what you have to think about this.
Can I just make some addendums to some of the things you just listed?
Please do.
So I'm not sure if I missed anything, or so the first thing with the Drush placeholders. That's something that should be fixed if you update to the latest version of Drush. I'm not sure if you have like the latest one, but pretty sure.
I probably need to update it. I've been scrambling trying to do the research for this blab, and so I didn't bother digging into. So you probably are right that it probably is Drush that's causing it, but I didn't know if it was Drush or if it was one of the contrib modules, and I just didn't feel like fooling around with my setup. I think I've actually got Drush installed through Composer, so it probably will be as easy as doing like a Composer global update or something like that. I just didn't bother trying it yet. You're probably spot on with that.
Then the trusted hosts setting is actually kind of interesting, because we've basically inherited the possibility to do the trusted hosts checking from Symfony, and it does sort of make sense to sort of look into that and get that setting going. But you're basically even if there's a warning on the status page, you're basically as insecure, quote unquote, as any D7 site out there. So it's not like even though it's like bugging you there on the status report page, is not something that's going to be like super critical to figure out, just sort of as a FYI. And then on the modules that you went through, transliteration, there's actually some form of transliteration in core. When you add like node types or vocabularies, it automatically, there's like this little widget thing that automatically adds a machine name for it when you type in the label, and that actually does transliteration. So if because I'm from Germany, if I put in the umlaut, and then it actually does that properly. Sadly, that's not being used for file uploads, which is one of those, another like, would be a really cool feature if you upload a file with like weird characters, that it would do that as well, but it doesn't in core, which is kind of unfortunate. And the last thing is views bulk operations is pretty much in core. So, for instance, the admin content page is that ships with Drupal 8 is actually a view, and so all the filters and search thingies and whatever you can do are basically what views bulk operations does. So that's sort of yeah. All right, so
Awesome. Yeah, let me ask you a little bit more about that. As long as you've got some of the, because like I'm saying, I've spent so many hours even just researching all this stuff to figure out what was in what state and what's already in core, and then actually do some testing on my machine to see about what dev modules were actually in a pretty decent state or not. Let me ask you about the HTTP host settings then, in regards to what if we're somebody who's running multi-site? How do we deal with those trusted host settings? Is it just a matter that we pretty much need to put all the reg expressions into, because like each of the, like if we are doing multi-site, basically what we wind up having with that is each one has its own sites.php. So we've got our sites all where we end up having our our settings.php, as opposed to having it in sites default settings PHP.
Right.
So do we go into each individual, sites site name / settings.php, and we do the reg expression just for that site in there, and then each settings PHP just has its own specific regex for that? Is that how that would end up working?
Yeah, that would be probably the preferred way.
Okay.
And then sort of what you need to watch out for is if you have like dev instances of your site at like localhost or foo.local or whatever, that if you don't put that in the regex, then your site is just not going to work. That's something you need to watch out for. Right, but yeah, that's exactly what you said would probably be the best practice for that in a more
because I know that they mentioned something as well, that you could do some type of change with the sites.php. There was some, and I haven't played with it to even see, because I actually like the sites.php, the way that they added that in Drupal 7. That was a pretty cool addition to help you sort things out, particularly when you're doing a multi-site type of setup. So, is there a way that is there a way that you deal with the trusted host through the settings the sites.php?
No, that's actually sort of a different level. The sites.php, just like in D7, basically just manages the negotiation. So what you could do is sort of like redirect your foo.local installation into your correct sites folder, so you don't have like a foo.local sites folder. I'm not actually sure, but it doesn't update so you would still need to add your like foo.local to the trusted host settings then in your settings PHP. I think, but I've not actually done multi-site in D8. So the one thing that that was actually changed with regards to sites.php in comparison to D7 is that even without a sites.php file in D7, Drupal would sort of like try to find the best match of the sites directory, like depending on the host name, and then you could have like all this magic with if you put in the port or whatever. And since that had to happen on every request, that was actually sort of a small performance hit for sites just using the normal sites default stuff and never actually bothering with multiple sites. So what now happened is that Drupal only ever does this sort of magic matching if there is a sites.php. That's sort of as a performance improvement for sites that don't use multi-site. So if you want to enable, so if you want to enable that and don't actually use any, like what you put in sites.php generally is like a mapping of like what I said, of like foo.local to your actual site. And even if you don't actually want to have a mapping, but still have multiple sites that get figured out automatically by the host name, then you still need to add a sites.php in Drupal 8. And it can be empty. There don't need to be any sites in there, but that's sort of like the switch that Drupal 8 knows, okay, now I need to invoke all that magic for you. That's sort of just...
That's an interesting thing. Yeah, I wasn't aware of that. I do take advantage of sites.php. When I'm doing my multi-site setup, I hadn't even really thought about Now it's interesting though that what you're saying is, because I would like how I viewed the sites.php was that it should actually kind of help your performance, because since you've got sites.php, it should be able to find it in sites.php, and it doesn't have to go through all this magic, because they've been doing that kind of magic, I know, since Drupal 6. I don't know if they were doing that in Drupal 5, but I know it's got this whole algorithm that goes through how it parses your domain, strip from this side, strip from that side, see if I can find a path and all that kind of stuff. And that's one of the things that I thought was so nice about sites.php is that now it doesn't have to do all of this parsing. It's like, if I can find it in there, I know exactly where to go. So I've just used it.
Right. So if you're using multi-site with sites.php, basically nothing has changed for you. If you're using multi-site without sites.php, you're going to have to add like an empty sites.php to get the same behavior that you had in D7. That's sort of the one line.
And if you're not doing multi-site, then you say, just don't even bother putting sites.php in at all, because then Drupal, again, still won't do any of its parsing. It'll just know that I'm going to look right into my site's default and to get my stuff here. Very interesting. Thanks. All right, cool. This is a nice thing about having somebody else to be able to talk to and get some more perspectives. All right, so go ahead, lay it on us. Libraries API versus using the YAML files to specify your external libraries, doing just the stuff that Drupal is doing, supposedly is doing better now in core in Drupal 8 than was being done in Drupal 7.
Right. Yeah. So there's like the fundamental problem that Libraries API attempts to solve is the problem of bundling external libraries, as probably, I guess, is obvious to anyone who's used it. And in fact, so I've heard that a lot, actually, people saying, like, do I even need Libraries API in D8? Because now we have the libraries YAML file. And that's sort of, so that's kind of a, well, or let me start the other way around. The library system in core actually exists in D7 pretty much conceptually in the same way that it does now in D8. So in D8, it's become a lot more powerful. It's got a lot of new features, and now the libraries are actually declared in YAML files and not in a hook. But the same functionality was basically available. So you could declare your libraries in a hook. In a hook in D7. And so why that was not sufficient and why Libraries API exists in the first place is because we cannot, or we do not, ship external libraries in our contra modules. So basically, if you're writing a custom module for your own site, because you have like a custom slider implementation, you just want to load some external script and pass it to, load it in your own script or whatever. And then, then you're using your library's YAML file. Then you don't need, you're totally fine to use the core library's YAML file and to just load the script in some way. And then you don't need Libraries API. But the same thing is actually true in D7. So if you're writing a D7 custom module and you just want to load up some JavaScript, you're totally fine to do that as well with the core libraries hook. And where Libraries API comes in is that it basically tries to separate the external library from the Drupal module, because so what's actually happened is that multiple Drupal modules want to use the same external JavaScript library. So like the canonical example is basically in D7 we have the WYSIWYG API that has support for CK editor, and the CK editor module, which also integrates with the CK editor library. And so what it used to be like is that you would download the library into the module folder, and the module would load it from there. And so then the problem becomes, if you have both of those modules installed, you might have different versions of the same library, and they might conflict. And also you basically need to, when you upgrade it, you need to upgrade it twice. And if you upgrade the module, then you would delete the module folder and upload the new one in place, but then you would have to re-download the library. And that's sort of the problem that Libraries API attempts to solve. So basically, for contrib modules that want to integrate with third-party libraries, the problem is still there, and they can't really use the library's YAML file in the same way that it's used in core, because for core we actually make an exception, because like core ships with jQuery and jQuery UI, and that's why basically Libraries API is not used in core, because we're doing that exception there, and so the core modules can actually just put all the jQuery UI stuff or whatever they need into the library's YAML file, and they're good to go. So another small caveat with that is that actually, so the library's YAML file actually has support for loading remote, so for loading files remotely. So if you do want to like load your script remotely, then even in theory for a contrib module, then that would even be fine, because that obviously sort of that still has the problem of possibly having like version version problems if like two modules want to include the same library in a different version remotely and everything. So, but in theory that would actually still work out of the box if you just put a library's YAML in there and put the external path there. So that's sort of like the build up for why Libraries API exists, and I think will still be needed in some fashion for D8. So the problem, and that's also the reason like why we didn't, why there's no release out for D8 right now, is that Drupal 8 asset system basically got completely revamped, and in Drupal 7 you would often use Drupal add.js or Drupal add CSS to like at runtime add scripts or styles to your page. And that's also what Libraries API used, and those functions got completely removed, and like their whole concept basically got removed. So there's no way to just at runtime willy-nilly load some script that you have, and so basically we need to sort of re-architect Libraries API to basically rewrite it from scratch, and so we started a little bit. So we started working on that, but it's basically because of all the other changes in Drupal 8, and also because we sort of want to, since we're already rewriting it anyway, want to fix sort of some other architectural problems that we had in D7. That's basically still like way pre-alpha. We're sort of still in the not in the planning phases, but like it's still far from being finished, unfortunately. So
okay. So I do have a question actually, because when I was starting to look into this and I was reading the YAML files, I actually interpreted the YAML files as saying, oh look, they can load this stuff remotely. And so I started playing with Colorbox, and Colorbox just wasn't working at all. I'm like, what's the deal? Why is this not getting loaded? And then, so I go into Colorbox's README file, and it says, okay, actually, you still need to download the Colorbox. So, what that YAML file was specifying was, this is the remote location of the jQuery plugin that I am expecting you to use, but it's not actually pulling it in. So I still needed to download it, and it even comes with the Drush plugin that allows you to get it downloaded into the right place. So I was kind of thrown off by that, because at first I interpreted it as like, oh, cool, this is a nice thing. We don't actually have to load these anymore. It'll load it remotely. But then it turned out like, oh no, Colorbox isn't working. So I did have to download it, and then of course I had to clear cache because the JavaScript was being cached and compressed, because I just went with whatever the default Drupal 8 installation was that I had there. So it still wasn't doing it. So until I finally downloaded and I cleared my cache to finally get Colorbox working. Now I still actually had a question when I was going through looking at this, even with the thought of like, oh, this is kind of interesting that they can load things remotely, because one of the things that I was thinking about, which is like what you mentioned here with using the Libraries API, is instead of, and I don't know that jQuery cycle is a good example. I don't know that there would be more than one module on your site to be jQuery cycle, but whatever, let's just pretend. like, because View slideshow needs jQuery cycle, and Colorbox is probably not a great example too, because I doubt there are any other modules that would be using Colorbox. But one of the advantages of using something like Libraries API is that instead of having multiple, instances of, just say, jQuery cycle loaded because you have all these modules that we're going to be doing stuff on the page, since they all knew to look for it in the same location, you'd have just the one copy of it. And so I was a little bit concerned about, like, okay, if we've got these modules that are using their YAML files to say, I want to load this externally, wouldn't we run into that same situation that if we've got multiple modules that are going to be in effect on the page that we're viewing and they're all trying to load it remotely, that it's kind of like duplicating all of that code right now? And it sounds like you're saying that actually is the case, that could happen. And it's not even just that it would be potentially that it was duplicated, but they might even have conflicting versions, that the one module might have loaded a remote version of, this one dot whatever, and some other contrib module is going to load the remote two dot whatever. And so we could have that plugin on the page twice with two different versions.
Yeah, or you could actually break your site. Like if you have JavaScript libraries that depend on each other, and you have like one module that loads the dependency in the wrong version or whatever, like you could totally in theory all hell breaks loose. And that's why that's not necessary. Like that's why I didn't like I maybe I phrased that wrong. Like I just basically wanted to point out that it's basically possible that that's like a feature of the core libraries to include the files remotely directly, but it's not actually. Yeah, as you basically lay out, it's not actually a good idea, and it's not something I would recommend in a contra module for just those reasons. So the problem with Libraries API is basically, or another problem, I guess, is that it started out doing just basically just what you said. So basically just enabling support for the Cites All Libraries folder. So that you could put all your libraries into there, and then modules could load the libraries from there and not have them be in the module folder, and basically sort of solve the one side of the problem there, that you wouldn't ever have like two versions of the same library because it's just one directory. So like it's actually not physically possible. And that's how libraries started out. And then we sort of, as it went on, we started thinking about that libraries, we would actually like to have Libraries API do a lot more, and that was basically Libraries API 1.x. And then we started out, like, we wanted to have Libraries API do a little bit more for you, because we realized that even with like WYSIWYG API or other modules, a lot of code was being duplicated. So for instance, to have like, each module would have like instructions on how to actually download the library. Some, as you say, like some modules would come with like Drush plugins, others wouldn't. And each library basically would also have to re-implement like the loading itself. Like it would have to iterate over some known list of files and call Drupal add.js or whatever. So all these sorts of things. And we sort of took a first stab at trying to solve some of those problems with Libraries 2.x, where we actually provided a hook similar to the core Libraries hook, where you could provide metadata about your library, and then Libraries API will go ahead and automatically load it for you. And that's what I alluded to earlier. That's like the thing that became impossible to do in D8, at least in the way that we were doing it in D7. But the problem is also that was never actually like finished. So we basically went ahead and just added that hook and sort of added some basic functionality for loading libraries. But it never actually got to the point where it was like very battle tested and where it was actually useful for contrib module authors to basically just have the dependency on Libraries API and then not have to worry about anything else. So basically, like we were trying to, like, for instance, downloading libraries via Drush is something that we in theory maybe could do in Libraries API. That's not something we currently do. and having some like UI instructions for the user on how to download the library is something that we could possibly do. Is not something we currently do, sadly. Yeah. Yeah, so that's sort of also why this is sort of hard, because, like I said, we're trying to fix like even with the problem of loading the assets dynamically. We're still not really doing a straight port from D7, because then we're sort of going to run into the same limitations and problems that we have now. Yeah, so that's sort of what's holding it up. And another, so sort of basically now to just complete the story of Libraries API more or less. Sort of on the conceptual level, like I said, the idea of Libraries API is to separate the modules from external libraries, and we've sort of taken the first step of separating the actual library files from modules with the Cites All Libraries directory. But then by introducing this libraries hook, what we've done is basically baked in the library metadata into the modules themselves again. So we basically just duplicated the problem now. If two libraries depend on if two modules depend on CK editor and they both implement the libraries hook and provide the CK editor library, you're going to run into terrible problems if they have conflicting metadata. So basically, we've not really solved the problem we attempted to solve, and that's sort of a hard problem. What you basically then run into is, if you're basically thinking the next step is that you need some sort of central repository of like library metadata for Drupal modules, which can be like which you can somehow download into your Drupal installation. Or yeah, it's just sort of a fairly complex problem, and not something we've talked about a lot, and something I've discussed with multiple people, and there's like a couple issues even about them, but it's not something that we've ever actually properly solved or have like a clear roadmap. But it's just, and that actually happened. So for instance, the D7 or the Spark initiative, Aqueous Spark initiative, that did a lot of the authoring improvements for D8 and then actually backported them to D7. They use the Libraries API to get stuff like underscore and backbone JavaScript frameworks into your Drupal 7 site. And they were really, really frustrated with Libraries API, because Libraries API sort of didn't, there's a lot of problems with like minified scripts and minified CSS, which is, obviously something that you totally want to use. Like if Libraries API doesn't support that, that's a problem. And also there was actually the case that there we actually hit the case that I can't remember which the other module was, but there were actually two modules that had both had declared metadata for the same library, and they were conflicting. And so like if you had only one of the modules on, it would work fine, but if you had both on, it would like just magically break and like all sorts of bad stuff. Yeah. So I would like to sort of paint a more beautiful and colorful picture about Libraries API, but that's sort of the state of things. Yeah.
That's fair enough. And so part of the issue is that you are having to deal with a complicated problem. It's not for lack of thought or lack of effort on your part or anybody else's part. It sounds like no matter what solution you propose, then that just has some other challenge. So if we do it this way, we're going to run into these problems. So to address those problems, you do it a different way, and now there's a different set of problems. And it just seems like you can't, you just extract yourself from those problems. That you don't have a great way to deal with it right now. So, and I mean, you've been sitting quietly so patiently. We'll give you a chance to jump in here in just a second. So I guess the question would be then, because libraries, like I used the Libraries API in Drupal 7 a lot. Like it just was, I thought it was a good way to do things, and I've never thought about it the level that you're thinking about it. And so I would wonder, how does that impact people's ability to use Drupal 8 now. And honestly, I don't think it destroys the ability. So what would be your recommendation? Like, okay, so we don't have a libraries API solution right now, but if you want to go ahead and build your Drupal 8 site, and that would be like the last thing that you were looking at, like, well, there is no release of libraries API. What would you say to people then? How do you get around it right now so that doesn't become, the showstopper for you to use Drupal 8?
So the way to work around it, I think, and it's, obviously it is just a workaround, and it's not really a super awesome solution, but basically just to have. So what I would basically do is just download the libraries somewhere that, like, just download the libraries into your files and reference them in a YAML file, in a libraries YAML file from either a custom module or themes support the libraries YAML as well. So if you're sort of doing front end stuff and writing a theme, then you could just download all your stuff, all your external stuff into your custom theme and put it in the libraries YAML and then be done with it. Like, again, that's not sort of the most awesome thing to do or the most awesome place to be, but I think that's sort of with minimal effort, you can sort of you can work your way through that. And with contra modules, it really depends. Like, that's if you want to load like external stuff from your theme or from custom modules. So with contra modules, I guess it really depends on how they, like you said, there was like a README file and it tells you where to download it. So it really depends on how the module wants to download the library, how it wants to load the library.
Yeah, so you're speaking of the contrib modules, and I'm trying to find a link. I've got it up in the stub already. I don't know if I can find it. I've got so many notes here. I'm scrolling through them. So I had actually invited another person who unfortunately wasn't able to make it today. He is a contrib maintainer, and he was running into this situation of not being able to use the libraries API. And right now I cannot find it in my notes. Which particular? Oh, it was the outdated browser was the module that he was writing, and he needed to do something. And so I think what he did in his situation is he said, well, I'm sidestepping libraries API right now. I am just going to use my info.yaml file. And that's not one, I haven't tested out that module to see how that would work. But like what I was mentioning, so it seems like what the color box module has done, that's a contrib module. I think they just have gone the route of saying, well, we're going to use the info.yaml, the library. Sorry, I'm saying info.yaml, the libraries YAML file, and just kind of do it that way. And still, we're going to rely on that people will go load it. That basically, I think what the color box is doing is their YAML file is saying, look for this in sites all libraries. I think is pretty much what they put in there.
So that was what I was going to ask. So where do they actually tell you to download it?
I've got to look. Let me see if I can really quickly get into. Let's see. I'm actually in Drupal 7. Let me see if I can get into a Drupal 8. Code base here and have a look at and specifically open up Colorbox and see if I can answer your question. So when I go into Colorbox's libraries YAML file, so what it's saying is, well, this is so like what it's saying here, it says look for my JavaScript in library/colorbox/ jQuery ... library/colorbox. And so I think what it's saying there, since it's just referencing it as /libraries / whatever, I think it's just making that assumption now that that means sites /all /libraries. I don't think it'll find it anyplace else.
Well, that's actually so in Drupal 8 you don't actually need the sites all libraries. Or like the sites all.
Oh, sorry. I'm saying I don't mean site. Right, I don't mean sites all. It's literally looking for it in. I'm sorry, I said the right thing. Wrong thing. It's literally looking for it in /libraries. It is not going to find that if you put it in. I'm so used to saying sites all or sites default. I'm still in Drupal 7 mode. It's specifying in the YAML file that I expect this to exist in /libraries, and if you don't put it there, it's not going to find it.
Right. So yeah.
Okay, so that's how I think that some people are dealing with this now. Amin, or if I'm pronouncing your name wrong, I'm so sorry.
No, that's fine.
What did you want to what did you want to ask, or what did you want to say?
I'd like to ask each one of you, what do you do and what do you use Drupal for? If you could like round it down to about 140 characters, that'd be great.
Sure. Okay. So somebody had asked the question in the stream there. So the short answer, without getting into like a big debate over syntax and semantics, Drupal.
Used, like,
so many people.
Characters, by the way, but no.
Yeah. So Drupal is comparable to like WordPress or Joomla. You might have heard.
Yeah, I know Drupal.
And so you could. What's that?
I know Drupal. I've worked with it. What do you use it for?
Oh, okay. Sorry, I didn't understand your question. I thought that you didn't understand what Drupal was. So what I use Drupal for, I actually use it as a framework to build custom web applications for my clients.
Aha, cool. And Tobias?
Tobias, what do you use Drupal for?
So I work at a German Drupal agency, and so we just build Drupal sites. And sort of on my own or my personal interest, I basically, because I'm a core contributor, so I work with Drupal core, and I know this is longer than 140 characters.
Yeah, sure,
now, but, so I basically sort of I really just like playing with Drupal 8 as sort of a framework, or with Drupal in general as a framework.
All right.
I mean, what do you use it for? What's the nature of your question? Why were you curious about how we use Drupal?
I'm always curious about anything that is built on the web, not specifically Drupal. I've used it, I think, 3 or 4 years ago. I think Drupal 6 was out back then, and Drupal was maybe out too. I don't remember. I used it to build a lyrics website. A friend of mine and me successfully scraped over 1 million lyrics illegally from another database, and we wanted to create our own lyrics website because most of the other existing ones suck. So what I remember is that I didn't like that when you have a clean install of Drupal, by default it makes like, I don't know, 10, 20, 30, maybe 50 requests. There's like 15 CSS files that are called, and it's a huge mess. And I worked for it for a couple of weeks, maybe a couple of months, but to be fair, I'm never using it again.
Okay.
Well, then you could maybe check out Drupal 8.
How many requests does the initial build make? The clean install?
I don't know the number of requests, but it should be like 2, because there's no JavaScript and there's one CSS. I'm like, there might be more than one if it gets aggregated into like 2 or 3. I'm not exactly sure on that, but it does get aggregated by default now. So there should be like I don't know if it's exactly 2 or it might be 3, it might be 5 or something, but
yeah,
something in that.
Anything under 10 is acceptable, I think.
Yeah.
For a clean install.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about some of the changes in Drupal 8, because so you're concerned about the number of requests, and that really turns you off. And so I guess it doesn't seem like you use Drupal 7. And honestly, I don't know if Drupal 7 was any better than that or not. And I mean, I'll admit, Drupal is a tool. That's how I learned to do web development. I mean, anything I know about web development is from having used Drupal. So I don't have any comparison. I never looked into any of these technical things, like how many requests does it make and how is it doing the templating and the markup and all this. Like, I just used it as like, oh, this tool is cool. I really like it. And that's all I've been using. But so complaints that many people have had, like Morton is the angry themer, although he's not supposed to be the angry themer anymore now with Drupal 8, choosing Twig. So that was another complaint that people had a lot with Drupal, is what Morton would name div-itis, is the way that Drupal would wrap everything to put it on the page. It just has a ton of HTML markup. And now that's something that I think has been largely addressed with Drupal 8. and with using Twig as their templating system. And so I don't know if they've taken some of these similar steps. It sounds like Tobias thinks they have done some of that work to help maybe with the number of requests that it makes, because Drupal 8 is leveraging the Symfony 2 framework. And so I don't know how much of the Symfony 2 framework is going to help with some of the issues that you were seeing when you were using Drupal 6. So this could be something that maybe on the flip side for some people, like for those of us who've been using Drupal 7 and so used to being able to do things the way that Drupal 7 has provided for us, and kind of biting our nails looking at like, oh wow, am I really ready to go to Drupal 8 yet? Because I don't know if it's got all the cool stuff that I'm used to using in Drupal 7. There may be other people who are coming from having looked at other versions of Drupal and said, oh my goodness, like this is craziness. I'm never using Drupal because I hate the way that it does things. Drupal 8 really does have a lot of like architectural changes under the hood that have been made, in addition to some of the user interface changes to maybe try to help it compete somewhat better with how WordPress looks out of the box. Yeah. They have put a lot of work in.
The Drupal 6 interface also was really unworkable. It was a huge mess. So I really hope they improve that too. I'm never turning back to a Drupal. I'm already traumatized by Drupal 6. But I hope they can improve just for the other people who still use it.
Yeah, well, here's another bit of good news though, because with Drupal 8 and the way they've built the web services, they've really built Drupal 8 so that it can be utilized in a true headless implementation. And I don't know that would necessarily answer your traumatization that you had from Drupal, but for people who are like just hardcore front end people, you can actually put on your own front end framework and interface that you're going to use, and then use Drupal in a headless fashion, so that you can leverage Drupal for what for what it is very good for, and maybe move away from some of the things that you found that it wasn't as good for. Although obviously there's still going to need to be some people who are dealing with the Drupal's interface in terms of the content management aspect of it. So again, I don't know that it's necessarily going to address the major complaints that you have with it. And certainly I'm not looking to try to evangelize here and push you to Drupal 8 if you've made your choice that Drupal 8 is just not your tool of choice. That to each his own, right? We all gotta, and even still, it's the same question that when people are looking at, do I want to use Drupal 8? It's still a to each his own type of answer, because you've got to look at what type of site am I building? What type of functionality do I need on it? What type of environment am I going to put it into? I think most shared hosting right now, by this point, they're up to whatever level of PHP they need to be on, so that you really shouldn't run into any of the system requirements issues that would prevent you from using Drupal 8. But some people.
Ask, what you guys use Drupal for? It was cool talking to you, and see you around.
All right, thanks. Thanks for hopping into the chat. So I know I had a bit of a slow start here, so maybe let's aim for talking for maybe, I don't know, another 15 minutes or so. That'll give us about an hour of discussion that we've had on this. I think, like I said, even at the beginning, the research that I've done, I've come up with so many hours worth of material that we could talk about here. Making a Blab module for Drupal. You're asking if somebody would be able to integrate Blab with Drupal. So I'll tell you this, to answer your question, if you look on the display right now, there's this thing next to the tweet and the post that sort of looks like a self-closing HTML tag, except it doesn't even have any tag in there. And I just even used that embed to run one Blab on my website. And I have to say, it was an absolutely horrible experience for me, because people still needed to sign into Blab to even be able to do anything with it embedded on my website. And so it seemed kind of pointless to use that embed feature, because it didn't save you anything. So I'm not sure that Blab even provides the type of API that you would need to be able to write a Blab module to integrate with a Drupal site.
Well, there's actually a Drupal module that does WebRTC, that integrates your Drupal site with the WebRTC layer in your browser, which is also what Blab is using, like what puts like the nice camera and everything in your Drupal. That's like the WebRTC. And there's actually so I'm just gonna post the link into the chat. It's called Drupal, and I've never actually used it. I've just like read about it, and I've always like I'm sort of interested in it. I've always wanted to actually try it out, and because I think it's pretty cool. It's a pretty cool thing. I'm just seeing now that it's only in Drupal 7, but yeah, sort of just as maybe as an addendum to that. If
oh sure, I've actually made sure I took that link, and so I've got it open in a tab here. I'll remember that later on. I'll put that in the replay, so we'll have that as a reference if people are curious to have a look at that. So, so one thing before I have you, we've got a different event coming soon that may be a bit more interesting. Oh, you know what? This might be somebody from Blab who is talking to me right now, rising to software engineer at Blab. Okay, cool. Thanks, Josh. And thanks for being on the Blab. Thanks for jumping in here. We love to have people from all kinds of different backgrounds. You can even take a seat if you wanted to, Josh. So one thing that I just want to run over here quickly before I kind of pull you back into the conversation, Tobias, is just to pick up this kind of train of thought of how I was going about doing my research to see about whether I would build a Drupal 8 site or not, or whether I'd recommend it. So I mentioned to you that I looked at what were the most installed contributed modules, what were the most installed contributed themes. So far, all we've run through was ones that didn't have a release and ones that did have a dev release. And then we spent a lot of time talking specifically about the library API, which was is in a dev state now. I'm not going to run through all of the other various modules that were in a dev release. I'll just kind of give you the TLDR version of it, that for the most part, even though they were in dev, I found that they seem to be working. There were a few of them that clearly still weren't working at all. They had some issues, but a lot of them were actually reasonably functional. And I don't know, there's probably like 10 or 15 of them that I had checked. And then the next tier that we would be looking at would be ones that were in an alpha plus state. And so there's one thing to keep in mind when you're looking at Drupal, that Drupal core has a particular naming convention of when something is dev, when something is RC this, when something is RC that, when it's alpha I'm sorry, I said it backwards. When it's alpha this, when it's beta that, and when it's RC this or that. When you get into contrib, that's totally up to the module maintainer to decide, is it called dev, is it called alpha, is it called beta, is it called RC? And so in fact right now, one of the modules that is in an alpha plus state is the, let me get down to it here, is the rules module, I believe. And yet, and I'd like to see if I can find it, because I wanted to tell you what status that was in there. And maybe I'll just hop over to its projects page quickly here. If we have a look at let's see what rules says on its page. So rules has got an 8x-3.0, and they're calling it unstable 7. So I guess they weren't actually calling it an alpha release. So even when you're looking at the contrib base, some of this is going to be a matter that you're really going to have to install the modules and test them to see whether they work. Just because it's in dev doesn't mean that it's not ready for production. And in fact, sometimes with contrib modules, you'll even see that the maintainers will tell you like, oh yeah, there was this bug that we had, but we've gotten a patch and we've rolled it into the dev release. So until we can roll another stable release, just use the dev module version of this. So you have some situations with the contrib that you're actually supposed to be using the dev module as opposed to be using an alpha, beta, or a release or a stable, an RC, release candidate, or a stable version of it. You'll have other contrib modules where they may have something that's called an alpha release, but they'll be telling you specifically like, don't use this on a production site. It's not ready. And so to make this decision, you really need to spend some time on your own to get this installed, do some testing, and see how things are working for you. So now I'll throw it back to you, Tobias, just to get your opinion, your take. How much have you played with Drupal 8, and what would be your takeaway and your recommendations about, hey, is Drupal 8 production ready in general, or like, what's your opinion on it?
So we built, like, at the company I work for, we've built a couple Drupal 8 sites. And so, yeah, there's a couple of points. So I think, first of all, you really, like, one important point is that Drupal 8 core, like, out of the box, has a whole lot more functionality than Drupal 7. So not even when it basically comes to like ticking off some of the modules, like the CK editor stuff or something, or views that's now been in core, been moved to core, but also like in terms of flexibility, as you mentioned, for instance, context vastly improved, so you can build sort of or for some smaller use cases, some sort of a web form light with that, or custom blocks can now be fieldable. We have entity reference in core, so you basically view modes and form modes, so you can basically build up way more complex setups and sites, basically just with out-of-the-box Drupal. That's sort of the first thing. Yeah, and then the second thing regarding contrib modules, I actually think that for a lot of use cases, you can actually start building Drupal 8 sites right now, because like my experience has been that a lot of stuff is already there, like it just basically works, and other stuff is either very fastly coming to be or is already, yeah. So generally I've had a very positive experience so far. There have been a bunch of exceptions, and it always really depends. Like if you need a site that just depends on rules and that you just want to click your rules together and you want to start building your site now, then you're not going to be able to use Drupal 8 because it just simply doesn't exist. But in a lot of the other, for instance, in the media, in the whole media complex, there are a lot of things actually that already work pretty well. It's sort of not trivial to wrap your head around it, because a lot of, like, basically all the modules that you use have changed now and they work together very differently. And the media folks are actually working on it and trying to basically provide like better tutorials and better instructions for people. But if you do sort of spend the time to wrap your head around it, a lot of stuff actually works pretty well already. Or if we're using, for instance, the paragraphs module, if people are using that in D7, that's already pretty far along. So we have one project that's using Solr with Search API, and that's actually working fairly well. We had a bunch of problems, but we actually started like almost a year ago. So a lot of stuff has been improved now. So if I were starting another project with Search API right now, I think that would be a lot less problematic. So Page Manager, we're using that, basically sort of the base foundation of panels. And actually I've heard of people that like panels itself is now being worked on, although I haven't used that myself in D8, so I can't really speak to that. So Path Auto and meta tag. We're actually using global redirect as well, which you mentioned. So all of these sorts of things, mostly token we're using, mostly just sort of work. Not all of them. Like as you said, like I really want to emphasize that what you said. Like you really do need to test a lot and try it out for yourself. But I think if you do that, you're going to find out like that a lot of stuff is already there. The problem is, of course, like which is the same in Drupal 7, that if you use unstable and not yet released versions of modules, that you're not under the protection of the Drupal security team. So basically, if someone finds an exploit, that's going to be that's going to be publicly disclosed. So that's sort of for another thing to take into consideration if you're using a module. like Path Auto that's only basically used for the back end more or less of the site, then that might be a risk you may want to take. Like, not that I want to explicitly endorse that, but that might be like less of a risk than something that's used in the front end. Or yeah, that's just something sort of to consider when you're making that choice.
Yeah, and things are coming along fast, actually, because the last time I had taken a look at this, for instance, like Path Auto didn't have anything for Drupal 8 yet. And it's like, oh my gosh, like how... It's not that it's physically impossible to build a site without Path Auto, but if you're building a substantial site, it's just ridiculous to manually be specifying aliases. So to not have Path Auto available, it kind of becomes untenable to build any significant site without that. And so the last time I checked, it's like, oh, Path Auto doesn't even have it doesn't have Drupal 8 release yet. And if Path Auto isn't done, well then, like this is one basic utility that you really want to have on every site. Now Path Auto is done, and in fact, Rules is aiming for March 2016, having a release that's going to be usable by Rules right now. I think is saying that they've got like almost enough in place that developers could do stuff with it, but they don't really have the UI UX in place, and so they're aiming for March 2016 to have enough pieces in place that both developers and like site builders would be able to use it. So stuff is coming along very quickly. Panels does actually have an Alpha Plus release. I'm not sure where they stand right now. I just threw everything into that third category. Anything above dev there, I just called Alpha Plus. So panels might even be usable at this point.
Yeah, I've heard that as well. Again, I haven't tried that out myself.
So there is a lot of stuff that's coming along. And one link that I do have that's loaded up on the replay is that Acquia really has jumped into the game here. They've pledged, I think it was $500,000 to help fund the porting of, and I don't know if they had a specific number of contrib modules. And the truth of the matter is that what they picked was, highly subjective based on how they're building sites and the modules that they want to have in place. But so you've got that funding that's coming along, and Rules is one of the modules that Acquia had funded to get them all the way to milestone 2. So there probably are a lot of modules that are going to be coming online. And honestly, I have to say, like, it's pretty surprising how fast the contrib base is coming online, because with Drupal 7, even with this Drupal 7 initiative about I pledge I'm going to have a full release on the day that Drupal 7 is released, I swear it took like 6 months to a year until the contrib base really caught up where you can build Drupal 7. So I was building Drupal 6 sites for like at least a year after Drupal 7 came out before I even considered Drupal 7. And it's pretty surprising to me right now to see like how quickly Drupal 8 is becoming a viable option, because what I would have said prior to this and prior to Drupal 8 being released, if anybody asked me about what do you think about Drupal 8, I would just kind of like, it's not going to be ready for you to use. I don't care even when it comes out. It's not going to be ready for you to use for another year after that, or even more. I would have bet that it would have taken longer because of the significant changes with Drupal 8. So it's pretty impressive how fast things are coming along. So the last thing that I'll talk about before we wrap up, because we didn't talk about the theme layer yet. And so that is another issue that people would need to consider. And personally, when I build sites, I don't roll my own theme. Like, I use base themes to build a custom theme on a site. And the good news is that when I looked at the most used themes, and obviously this data is going to be pretty much based on what was Drupal 7, is that Bootstrap, Omega have, and those are two. I don't know. I haven't used Bootstrap before, but I think you would consider like a base theme. But Omega has been ported. There's an Alpha Plus release of Omega available on Drupal 8, and this is actually the Jake. So there was kind of a fallout with Jake Strawn and the whole team. There was the Omega 3 versus Omega 4 versus Omega 5. So the Omega that I'm talking about now in Drupal 8 is Jake Strawn's envisioning of how Omega works. And I haven't ever used Omega 4, although Omega 4, I actually am working on a site where they are using Omega 4. I'm the back end guy. I have nothing to do with it there. So there is the Omega based theme, but the Zen theme base theme has not been ported to Drupal 8 yet. So if you were a Zen type of a person for your base theme, you might also have some second thoughts about whether you are going to move to Drupal 8. On the other hand, like I mentioned already, Drupal 8 is designed to give you that opportunity to do headless. And so you could do something completely different in the theme layer. I haven't investigated that yet. I've got no idea like what kind of learning curve you're undertaking to actually hook into Drupal properly to make it go headless. Have you had any type of experience with that, Tobias, or heard of, I know there are sites that are actually doing Drupal 8 headless right now. What have you heard about it?
Yeah, so the really cool thing is, and I'm not 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure that Drupal 8 is actually unique among like all other competitors in this, is that we've added the REST support to views actually. So what you can do is basically click together, sort of, because when you're doing headless, you basically have some front end app with like Angular, JS, or Backbone or whatever, that basically you have to feed some sort of JSON array of values that you want to display. And with Drupal 8, you can actually use the Drupal 8 views to basically do like what you've always done in views, like click together your fields and sort them and add filters and sorts and blah, 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 blah. And then instead of rendering HTML views, it just spits out the whole JSON array, and then you can point your app to the path that you've created in views, and boom, you've got your headless Drupal. And I went to Drupal Camp Vienna last year, and Ruben, who was also like a pretty massive Drupal 8 theming expert, he actually did a session on that where he did that basically live in the session. He installed like the default, I think it might have been Angular JS, sort of like the example app that they ship, and he just integrated that with the custom Drupal 8 site in like a matter of 5 or 10 minutes or something, just clicking together a view. So yeah, that's something I'm pretty excited about. Yeah.
Cool. So it sounds like that is a viable option for people who know that sort of a thing that may just eliminate one concern that you even have about Drupal 8. If you say, forget it, I don't care about whether there's a base theme or not, and I don't care whether Drupal 8 is using Twig or whatever other thing, because I'm just going to go headless and I'm going to roll my own front end app for building the site. So there you have it, folks. The overall conclusion that I would draw from this is that it's actually worthwhile looking at Drupal 8 when you're going to be building sites. Just all right, I'll answer your question there in a moment. What you're going to want to do, though, is you're going to actually want to install it and install some of the modules that you think you want to use, and give it a bit of a test run through so that you don't get caught by any nasty surprises. But it seems like you'd actually have a pretty fair chance of being able to put things together. Now, I guess the other piece that you'd need to consider, though, is if you are a code monkey, if you are a backend guy and you're building custom apps, you're going to have to understand how to use the more object-oriented approach, and how you're going to use your YAML files and the namespaces in the new way of doing things. So that would probably be something else. Like for somebody like me, I'm not going to be jumping on Drupal 8 too terribly quickly, because I'm going to have to get my chops in order to be able to even do the custom modules there. So your mileage may vary, buyer beware, but it's worthwhile checking it out. Now, to answer the question, being a PHP coder and you want to start with Drupal, I'll tell you this: the first steps that you want to take as a PHP coder is to make sure that you understand the Drupal way. And this has nothing to do with whether it's Drupal 8 or Drupal 7 or Drupal 6 or Drupal 5, any version of Drupal. The big problem that a lot of PHP coders run into when they start using Drupal is they know PHP, and they'll do something like, let's enable the PHP filter and they'll start putting PHP into the modules to get stuff running. And this is not the way that you do things in Drupal. So the first thing that you want to do if you're from a straight up PHP background is to get a little bit of a schooling and education in how you go about doing things in Drupal, and don't try to code everything from scratch in PHP. There's ways that you hook into Drupal to get it to do things. There's lots of contributed modules. So that's about the, I don't know if that was 2 minutes or 3 minutes or so answer for what you need to do if you're a PHP coder coming to Drupal. But the good news is that's one of the things that Drupal 8 was looking to do, is to help this transition for people who maybe knew a lot about web development, maybe knew a lot about things like PHP, to be able to come to Drupal as a framework basically, and be able to get more into the flow instead of everything being done like the Drupal way, to start using some more of the common web development best practices, namely like using a tool like Symfony 2. So if you're a PHP coder, if you're familiar with Laravel or Symfony, you may find that getting yourself into the swing of things with Drupal is a little bit smoother with Drupal 8 than it would have been for Drupal 7. So with that, I want to give one more shout out for people. If there's anybody else who has a question that you want to ask, any last thoughts that you want to share, if you wanted to jump into a seat, I'll give you this last opportunity to do it before we go off air. In the meantime, thanks so much for taking a seat on the show, Tobias, for talking with me. It was a pleasure to get a chance to meet you and hear your perspective on things, and certainly to kind of get that inside scoop on Libraries API. Boy, oh boy.
Thanks very much for having me. It was very nice. I hope I didn't bore everyone too much with the internal details of the problems with Libraries API, but yeah, it was a fun discussion to have.
And it's definitely useful hearing it, because Libraries API is not the only utility module that's having to deal with these types of media. Is another example, although media has gotten a lot of its functionality in there, just in totally different ways. So this isn't specific to Libraries API. There's other modules that are having to deal with this similar type of issues, that like, okay, how do we solve this problem properly now? And maybe there are other modules that they've kind of fudged their way through it before, but now with Drupal 8, they're not really looking to go that road, saying, let's just fudge it again. They're saying, no, let's really try to get it right this time. So I think the discussion was totally worthwhile for people to be able to hear about some of those types of things that the contrib maintainers need to address in trying to solve problems with Drupal. So thank you, everybody, for being a part, whether here in the seat or virtually in the stream. Thank you for those of you who actually catch the replay later on. Like I said in the beginning, I'm planning to make this a weekly event. I haven't decided my topic for next week. I've got a bunch of ideas, but I will schedule it, so you can come back right here to my blab.im/tydrupal to find the scheduled chat next week if you want to take part in it. You can go into Reddit. You can upvote my posting of the chat that I did today, so that people can see that people actually enjoyed having this. And Reddit will actually consider making this one of their regularly scheduled posts that they put there, so that people will know what's going on Mondays. And otherwise, you can look to get in touch with me through any of the other channels where you can find me online, and I'll be happy to let you know what I've got in mind. If you've got any ideas for what you'd like to see discussed in upcoming chats, please, please, please do share them with me, because I'm looking to make this. This isn't all going to be Drupal 8 centric either, by the way, folks. We can have tips and tricks. We've got questions and answers about other things with Drupal as well. There's tons of things that we can be talking about, and I look forward to being able to continue to do that. Thanks for stopping on by. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you again.
Bye-bye.
Bye.